Raise your voices, raise your glass high. Welcome to the Drink O'Clock Podcast. Let's dive. Oh, grab an old fashioned and join the fray. Raise your spirits, let the music play. From the corner pub to the dance hall floor. Drink O'Clock Podcast, we're ready for more.
We're live on a beautiful, beautiful Thursday. My name's Rob Valincius. I am the host of the Drink Clock Podcast, and I have with me Wilk Wilkerson, which is a fucking awesome name, by the way. And you are a husband, you're a father, and you're the host of the Derate the Hate Podcast, along with being a Christian conservative, which we've had a couple of those on the podcast. Welcome to the show, man.
Glad to be here, Rob. Man, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
You got a cool background, dude. What's that painting?
So this fella here is somebody I do not know, and so here's an interesting story for you, Rob. So back when I first got out of the service in the late '90s, I drove cab in the city of Orlando, and there was this gal named Miss Coleman that I used to pick up at the YMCA quite often down in Winter Park. Would take her back to her townhome. She was, kind of disabled. She was quite old at the time. I think she was in her late 80s, 90s, whatever. So I'd drive into her.
Gotta love old people, bro. I work in the senior market. I love when someone's in their 80s and 90s and they're fucking out and about.
They're just doing stuff.
Like,
and I got a lot of respect for people who, they don't just give up, right? They're out there, they're doing stuff. And she would go down to the YMCA like 3 times a week to swim and try to get some exercise and whatever. She couldn't walk very well, but she would go get in the pool and kind of walk laps, and she would request me as a cab driver to pick her up and bring her back to her house. Well, she had all these portraits hanging in her garage from her husband who had died. He was a portrait artist, and he had died like probably in like the late 70s or early 80s. He'd been gone a long time. So he had all these portraits hanging in the garage. She had no idea who these people were. They were just people that never came back for these portraits. And I had mentioned that I liked this one a couple times, and I think it was either Christmas or my birthday or something. But she asked me one day, she's like, "Do you want that painting?" I'm like, "Are you sure?" She's like, "I have no idea who it is, and they aren't coming back for it. My husband's been dead for 2 decades. I don't know." So long story short, she gave me that painting. It was like 1998, 1999. So I've had it for 25, 30, almost 30 years now, I guess. So I have no idea who this guy is. I just love the painting, and I have it in my background.
You know what, dude? That's a cool story because I'd imagine if she was 80 or 90 in the 90s, she's probably not around anymore.
I would imagine.
If she is, holy shit. But it's wild just how long a media can outlive a human, right?
That's right.
I mean, paintings, YouTube, and these podcasts. I mean, who knows who's going to be listening to this podcast in 50 years?
Right.
I mean, if anyone, who knows, But maybe, someone... I look at it this way. It's a legacy thing for me. My brother...
What legacy do you want to live?
Yeah, I don't have any kids. I have dogs. We love our dogs. They're like our kids. But my brother just had a baby. He turns 1 in July or August 1st. I think it was August 1st. And I kind of think it'd be cool to like, hey, check out my podcast when you're, 10, 15, and stuff like that. You don't really think about that stuff when you're in your 20s, but when you're in your 30s and 40s, that's when your shit really starts to like hit the mind. Like, hey, I don't want to just disappear. I want to leave something on the earth,
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Rob. If I think back to the stuff that I was doing in my 20s and my 30s, I don't want my kids to remember me for that stuff. But I will tell you this: the stuff that I'm doing now with, I've got 280 some podcast episodes, and that doesn't count the times that I've guested on others. And the stuff that I'm doing now to better the world in which we live, That's the legacy that I want to leave for my kids, my nephews, the people that come behind me. I do it for that reason, because the world that we live in right now has got some issues, obviously, and I just want to do my part to fix it. And yeah, so, but I will tell you, when talking about our 20s, talking about our 30s, all the mistakes, all the crazy shit that I was doing then is actually how I got to where I am now. So I don't, don't have a lot of regrets in that sense, but definitely learned a lot of lessons the hard way.
You know what? I tell people all the time, I think what makes us human is, how we handle a situation and who we become at the end of that. And, some people lay down and die. That's who they are. And I'm not knocking it for it. If that's your prerogative, that's you. But I think and it's tough. And I've talked a lot about this, on my podcast. And I don't know, I didn't get a chance to check yours out, but I don't know if you've talked about this. But in today's society, people are very quick, especially younger people, to just give up. Like, oh, the world is just against me, and they give up. And you see that a lot more now. But how old are you, Wilk?
I will turn 50 here in a few months, so
Okay, so I'll be 39 next week. So I'm
nice.
pushing 40. So we're in that same bracket, right? Where we grew up when the internet really wasn't a thing.
Definitely not.
We had to go outside and play. Your mom's like, hey, make sure you're home by dark. We didn't all have cell phones, and but we got to grow up and then grow into that. Whereas you had, today's day and age, that's just what they have, right? They have all of this stuff. And I think something changed, right? With that algorithm, and it's changed how people are. Now, not everyone's like that, because I think you do have people that are like us that are having kids that are teaching them the values, and they're teaching them, hey, if you get knocked down, pick yourself back up, and do better. Don't just give up, right? Because if you give up, then what's the famous Michael Scott saying? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? Wayne Gretzky. But
That's right.
that's like the type of mentality I think we need to get back to. It's tough, because I don't think it's like that now with a lot of people, especially younger people, unfortunately.
It's not, and unfortunately, I think what it comes down to, Rob, is people have lost their ability to, and not all people, obviously. There's, but I think there is an epidemic in this world today of people who have lost their ability to deal with adversity. Right? No, they're in constant search of recognition, some kind of uh, I don't know. I don't want to call it like a built-in narcissism thing or whatever, but when you grow up in an age of influencers and all of these different shows that have done all of these, they portray these kids' lives in these shows now in a way that is just not real life, and so people are in constant search of recognition, and when they don't get the recognition that they're looking for whatever it happens to be, constantly being told they did a good job just because they did something that they should have been doing anyway, or things like that, it really puts them in a position. It's almost like setting them up to fail, because they
Yeah.
have not had the opportunity to work through the idea that not every parent is going to be at every soccer practice. Not every parent is going to be able to go to every single little thing that you're doing all the time, you know and so they are constantly bombarded online and on television and whatever, with the idea that parents are there to be at your beck and call, and you are the center of the universe all the time, and that's just not a
Yeah.
reality. It's just not, and it will never be. But they are made to believe that, and it's a false it's certainly a false perception that is presented to them on what life is going to be. And then when real life starts, when they have to start interacting with real life, well, then it's like getting hit in the face with a frying pan, right? I mean, it's
Oh,
a
yeah.
Mack truck running your ass over because that is not real life. And they're just being bombarded constantly, through screen time and things like that, with this false perception of what things are, and it's just not going to be that way. It's not that way. So to your point, we live in an age right now where people, once they are presented with real life, and they cannot deal with real life because they have not built that muscle, right? They have not built that muscle to actually deal with adversity. They just curl up in the fetal position, stick their thumb in their mouth, and wish that it would all go away. It's
Yeah.
it's unfortunate, but quite honestly, the answer is in the home. The answer is with the parents. The answer is, we can't have screens raising our children. We cannot pretend like allowing YouTube to raise our kids is going to produce good fruit, right? So it's it's easier to it's easier to build good people than fix broken adults. I will tell you that.
I would agree with you, and look, I don't know about you, but we didn't get trophies for last place. It's like, hey, do better next time, bud. Go home. Like I played a lot of sports growing up, and never once did I get a hey, good job for letting that guy score. Good job for being out there. No, that's my coach was like, what the fuck were you doing? Why didn't you cover the goal? Playing soccer, or why didn't you hit that basket? When you needed to. Like. I rant sometimes. That's my rant of the day. Is like I have hope though. I do have hope because I feel like I'm starting to see more and more people speak out to like, hey, look, like deal with it. And a lot of it's us millennials where we're coming out of the woodwork and it's like, look, this shit needs to stop. Because we've been quiet for a while. I feel like. And I think like my dad was born in the 60s. My dad, he'll be 62 in January. And he's not good with technology. And I don't think he understands, like he's smart to a certain degree, but he doesn't understand the way the world is now. And I think that generation is like that. And then you have your generation. And then you have my generation. And then outside of that, it's a clusterfuck, but I'll end my rant there. Let's talk about you, dude. Let's talk about Wilk. All right. I love to start my episodes with your background. So talk to me. I know you've had a unique background. You talk about working at an early age. So tell me and my listeners a little bit about yourself and growing up and kind of how you got to where you are now.
Right. So, yeah, I appreciate the question, man. So everybody's got a story, and every story matters, and I think it's important to let everybody know that when I talk about my background, I don't do it to try and make people feel sorry for me, because I don't want anybody feeling sorry for me, and I don't try to pretend like my background is any worse than anybody else's. But I will tell you this, Rob, is when I was a very young person growing up in the Midwest, early 80s. I mean, I was born in the mid 70s, but my first recollection of a lot of things started happening in like the 1980. So the world was very, very different in the 80s, especially in the Midwest, in the rural Midwest. It, you know, it was a hard time for a lot of people, especially people my parents' age. You know, coming post Vietnam era, the economy in the late 70s was just horseshit. It was horrible. If you were part of the blue collar working class, it it was kind of ugly, right? And my
Yeah.
folks were no exception, and they were no angels, and great people, just probably weren't doing things the way, uh, the best way that they could, and they did the best they could, while not doing the best thing they could, I guess. And so we moved around a lot, and jobs and work were sometimes tough to find, and sometimes the work that you found didn't pay enough to put food on the table, or buy the clothes that we needed or whatever. So I was poor. You know, I was poor.
Been
I
there.
had
Been there, brother.
yeah, yeah. So we moved around and bounced around, and went where the work was. And then eventually, when I was a teenager, my dad went back to college and started doing things better. At that point, I had already, at the age of 10, I started working. Right, I wanted a motorcycle. Well, initially I wanted a jean, or not a jean jacket, like a leather jacket, like Michael Jackson. For whatever reason, couldn't dance, couldn't sing, but I wanted a leather jacket like Michael Jackson because he was the coolest thing out there at the time. And so I started. My dad said, "Okay, well, yeah, we'll raise some chickens. I'll give you a quarter for everyone that stays alive, by the end of the whatever period of time it was, and you can buy whatever you want." I ended up buying a baseball glove with it instead of a leather jacket because my dad said, "Hey, it's your money. You earned it. You make the decision, and you do what you do." So that was my first lesson in figuring out how I take the money that I earn, get what I want, and the consequences are if I want one thing, I don't get the other. That's the way it was. I started working 3 jobs by the time I was 10, 2 paper routes, and I was a janitor at a dry cleaning business Monday through Friday from 5 to 5:30. I cleaned the lint filters, took out the trash, got paid $5 a week for it, saved up, bought my first motorcycle at 10 years old. I've been working ever since. So
Wow.
I say all that to say this. There was a lot of things my parents couldn't give me. One thing they did give me was a lot of love. I loved my parents. They loved me, and they loved me. They loved my sisters, and what they couldn't give me was like material things. So all that stuff I had to get myself, and I learned to earn. And I worked my way up, being a blue collar guy. Tried going to college a number of different times. I was in the service for a while, and never, never liked college. Never finished college, but worked my way up and have done very well for myself in the world of business. And so here I am today. I do a podcast. I work with an organization called Braver Angels. I'm now their director of media and media systems and operations. And I've had conversations with some of the greatest people in the world. Some of the greatest thought leaders in the world. I've been in interactions with people. I mean, presidents of the United States know who I am. It's the weirdest thing, Rob, to actually live out the thing that so many people say cannot happen, because it can happen, and I've done it. So I tell you what, it really starts with mindset. So you ask, who am I? What's my story, right? My story is the fact that I had a lot of animosity, a lot of anger, a lot of things that I learned growing up, and bad behavior that I learned growing up. And I learned that if you don't learn from your mistakes, life will keep kicking your ass. And
Quite true.
and I
Quite
got tired of
true.
getting my ass kicked, to be frank. Uh, so so I've made a lot of mistakes, made more than my share. And the one thing is, I've accepted accountability for them. I look at the mistakes that I've made, and I've learned from them. I've built upon the lessons from them, and I've turned my life into something that I am unbelievably grateful for. And I just consider myself a blessed man now because of it.
So when did you first realize that personal accountability and gratitude could transform your life?
So, I used to hear people talk about gratitude and what are you grateful for today, and things like that. And it just seemed, very cliche, and what
Gimmicky, right?
gimmicky.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Right. And but then I started to learn about things like the reticular activating system and what that is and why that works. And so when I started to put all of these things together, like gimmicky phrases like "fake it until you make it," and what are you grateful for
Living the
today?
dream.
Living the dream,
That's
right?
what I say all the time.
Um, yeah, people ask me how I'm doing. I say if I was any better, I'd have to be twins, right? Because there's not enough. There's not enough of me to be this good. Um, it's so I started thinking about those things, right? And um I was in a real estate conference several years ago with a guy named Brian Pert. It was the first time I had heard about the reticular activating system and how that thing works. And he was talking more about the ideas of opportunities and how to use that reticular activating system in the world of business, and why it's important for seeking out opportunities. But then years later, when I started learning more about gratitude and why gratitude was important, and then I started thinking about, and I started combining the two things, and I said, if I start thinking about what I'm grateful for each day and start focusing on what I'm grateful for, as opposed to those things that I don't have, or the things that I wish I had, or focusing on the things that I wish I'd done differently yesterday, or wishing thinking about the shit thing I said to somebody a month ago or a year ago, or beating myself up over this particular thing, or that particular thing. If I start focusing, Rob, on the things that I am grateful for, my brain can only focus on so many things at any given time. And by focusing on what I am grateful for, all of a sudden I start to find more things that I'm grateful for. And my brain naturally, because of the reticular activating system, will start to fall away from all of those other things. The things that make me angry, the things that bug me, the things that I wish I had done that I didn't do. You know, I could focus today on all the things that I wish I'd done when I was 25 years old, when my body wasn't all busted to shit. But now I'm going on 50 years old. I'm in a lot of pain. I can't do those things today. But you know what? I still have a lot to be grateful for today. So why would I sit here today? And this is where the personal responsibility thing comes in. Why would I sit here today and beat myself up for all the things I wish I'd done when I was 25 and waste the minutes that I have left today sitting here at 50? So,
Yeah, time is our biggest enemy, right?
well, it
At the
is.
end of the day.
It is, but it's also our biggest friend, right? Because
Sure.
we only have so much of it. We'll never make more of it. So why would we? I mean, and you say it's our biggest enemy. I wouldn't say it's an enemy so much as an opportunity, right? So when we think, I'm a business guy, so I think about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, right? Uh, I think of, instead of time being an enemy or a threat, enemy or time is an opportunity, right? What do we have left? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. We got no idea, whether we got 5 minutes, 5 years, or 50. Uh, uh, but it's an opportunity to take what we have left, which we just don't know. The bucket isn't infinite. That's the only thing we know. And say, okay, why would I waste it on things that I can't control? Why would I waste my mental energy, my physical, whatever I've got left for physical, whatever, and waste those minutes that I have left because I don't know how many I've got? So when I think about personal responsibility, this is where it's so important for everybody, is don't waste your mental energy or your happiness or anything else on things that you cannot control. Focus on that which you can control. Be grateful for the things that you have, and make every single day the day that you want it to be. Because ultimately, it comes down to you and you making the day that you want it to be.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I talked about this multiple times, probably even last week. I was one of those people. I've had that, just, I wish I would have did this. I wish I would have did that. And I would sometimes just wake up miserable. Every day I just wake up miserable.
Yeah.
And it got to a point where I'm like, all right, I need to start thinking about the things I do have, right? The wifey, the dogs, a house, a good job. I have things. I got a computer. I have a podcast. I got businesses. And look, I'm not perfect. I still have plenty of days where I wake up in a shitty mood just because we're human. But I think just it took a while, right? It's not
Yeah.
going to happen overnight, but I think just having that mentality has changed me. Like, I'm a lot happier now than I was 2-3 years ago, even though I have the same things, right? It's not like anything really changed.
Right.
It's just that my mentality, I had to just take myself out of this, like, wasn't like unhappy all the time, but I would try to focus on things like, hey, I could do this, or I could have did this. I could have a better job. I could have a better car. I could have a bigger house. If you don't focus on that and you just focus on the things you do have, I think more and more people would be happier. It's not easy, and I'm still working on it. And I say this all the time because there's things you just can't change, right? I mean, and you just have to just kind of, life is weird. You just got to go with the flow. I mean, there's nothing else you can really do. I mean, there's things you can change. Your mindset is definitely one of them, right? And it's something, yeah. I mean, it's something you were basically talking about the whole time. There is your mindset.
That's right.
Could you break down what did you say, the reticular activating system? Could you break that down, like, for dummies? Like, what is that?
So the reticular activating system is just like this little pencil style thing, like right in the back of your brain, right? It's just this little thing, or that's where it's activated, that's where it works, or whatever. I don't know
Okay.
the medical all the medical ideas or the neurology parts of it, but the reality of the reticular activating system is it works. The best way that I've heard it explained, Rob, is this. So uh so I used to drive a Chevy Avalanche, right? I drove a green Chevy Avalanche, and I had that truck for several years. And while I was driving that Chevy Avalanche, or for the years that I had it, I would notice almost every Chevy Avalanche on the road because it was what's most familiar to me, right?
Yep.
So it's very familiar to me. That Chevy Avalanche is what I was used to. Now, when that Chevy Avalanche finally crapped out on me and I had to get a new truck, I got a Silverado. Now all of a sudden I'm driving a Silverado. I don't necessarily notice all of the Avalanches anymore, but I do notice the Chevy Silverados, right? Or or if you have a particular shirt that you're wearing on a particular day, for whatever reason, your brain is going to catch if somebody else is wearing that same shirt, right? And it'd be like, Rob at the office is wearing the same shirt as I am. What the hell's going on here? It had to be today. But you noticed
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
whereas any other day you probably wouldn't even notice that Rob was wearing that shirt, right? So it's the reticular activating system. It's going to trigger in your brain and lock onto what you have that's most familiar to you. Okay, so when you as a human being, and this is just a human thing. I mean, it's something that we all, that are of sound mind and body, have. And if you if you're constantly focused on being a victim, right? Let's go back to, you talked about participation trophies and participation ribbons and things like that, right? So
Yeah.
so kids nowadays are used to, getting that trophy or getting that whatever, and they don't know how to deal with adversity, right? And part of that is due to what I call the perpetual victim mentality. Because if you, for
Yep.
whatever reason, if every time something doesn't go your way, you have an inability to deal with that particular thing, you then make that the most familiar thing in your brain. Instead of focusing on all the good things that are happening in your life, like, I've got a warm bed to sleep in tonight, I've got clean water to bathe in and drink, I've got food on the table, I've got parents that love me, I've got, all of these things, right? Instead of that, now all of a sudden I'm a victim. That coach was out to get me. That referee was out to get me. And that becomes what's most familiar to you. You start to focus on that which you don't have in life, or what bothers you in life, or whatever. So you can actually turn this thing around, right? You can actually steer that reticular activating system by focusing on those things that you're grateful for and those things that make you happy. there's an old phrase, right, where some people will look at a field full of weeds and pick out the one flower. And then there's other people that will look at a field full of flowers and see the one weed, right? So it's
Yeah.
what you choose to focus on in life that's going to bring you more of that particular thing. Now, it doesn't mean that you have a lot of better things than everybody else in the world. And it doesn't mean that they have a lot of worse things than you do. But our brain can only focus on so many things. Our reticular activating system, right here in the back of the brain, can only focus on so many things at any given time. And if you're focused on and you make the thing that you're most familiar with, all the things that piss you off or make you feel like a victim or whatever, you are going to seek out points of affirmation for that naturally. It's a human reaction. It sucks, but it's a human thing, right? But if you focus on those things that you're grateful for and those things that make you happy and those things, those wins in life, right? I don't care if it's one win a day or whatever, but if the most familiar thing in your brain was this win or that win or the other win, and 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 they're actual wins, not participation trophies, because then you're just setting people up again for failure. But
Mm-hmm.
if you focus on real wins in life, I made it to work today and didn't hit a single stoplight, you know, um, or
Nobody cut me off.
yeah, right. But it's amazing how life begins to change because of that thing in the back of our brain. We can change the trajectory of our day on any given day because of what we choose to make most familiar to us, you know instead of focusing on the fact that the water in the shower wasn't hot enough this morning. I focus on the fact that I had a nice towel that smelled good when I got out of the shower. Okay. I mean, I'm just throwing out examples here, but it's a
Yeah.
matter of what you focus on. What you talked about some days you wake up in a shitty mood, right? But the reality is like when I think about each day that I'm not traveling and I wake up and I wake up next to my wife. It's the best thing that I could do on any given day is wake up and my wife's right next to me. She typically gets up a lot later than I do. It's not like we talk when I first wake up, but just the fact that she's
Same.
there, I can, before I get out of the bed, I roll over, give her a kiss on the cheek, and I get out of bed. I go take a shower and I start my day. Right? That is a huge thing for me. I love that. It's just one of the things that I focus on as being part of how I want my day to start. You know, but on the days that I'm traveling and I'm speaking somewhere, or I'm at a conference or whatever, and I wake up and my wife is not there, do I focus on the fact that my wife is not next to me? No. I focus on the next thing that I'm grateful for, right? I got a clean towel. I'm in a nice hotel room. I'm not sleeping in the back of a van somewhere, whatever it is, right? But
Yeah.
I get to choose personal responsibility. I get to choose my response. I get to choose what I'm going to focus on today. And if I focus on something that's positive as opposed to what's negative, I've got a much better chance of having a good day.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I think more people need to do that. But I will say this at a personal thing. I'm still working on it, and it takes time.
It's not an
Just
overnight
because
process.
your brain is just. I'm a creature of habit. I like doing things a certain way, and when something isn't that way, it throws me off, and then things, then I have to handle it, and that's being human, right? But like, it's also part of that too, is like how you handle that adversity that messes up, your yeah, I guess your rhythm, right? Your everyday rhythm. Now you talk a lot about civility, seeing the humanity in others. Obviously we live in a polarizing world today, divisive, in a lot of ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's, politics and religion, or even the color of your skin these days, right? Well, that's kind of always been around, unfortunately, but that's also still there. How can people actually start practicing civility um, on a day-to-day basis? Like, what's one thing you think that everybody could do, to add to their everyday lives?
Listen with the intent to understand rather than to respond, right? So when you get into a conversation, you know, the everybody is going to have triggers, right? I mean, we've all, even me, I say, nothing offends me, right? But the reality is there's always going to be something for all people that's going to trigger them, going to offend them, or whatever. But I will tell you this, Rob, when it comes down to it, when we're having conversations with somebody that we are very, let's say we're quite certain that we're going to disagree with,
Yep.
the reality is we need to open our ears and open our minds, not with the intent to we don't have to uh we don't have to let our preconceived notions inhibit our ability to listen to people and try to understand how they've come to believe what they believe. So I think one of the biggest things that we can do is engage with people in conversations, engage with people that are outside of our bubbles, engage with people that we very likely are going to disagree with, but do it in a way not to try and change their mind, not hardened to the idea that they might change your mind, but listen to truly understand who they are and how they have come to believe what they believe, even on the most contentious and ugly of issues. Listen with the intent to understand and have a mind open enough to the idea. You talked about pro-human. I talk a lot about pro-human stance and civility, and I sit on. I mean, I work for the organization Braver Angels, which is America's largest cross-partisan grassroots organization, bridging political divides, trying to cross those partisan divides, right? But I also sit on the board of advisors for an organization called the Pro Human Foundation, which which is really about educating people on what a pro-human stance is and why that's important in our interactions in life, right? As human beings, we all have very similar wants, needs. I don't care, what ethnicity you are, what color you are, what part of the planet you came from. We're all human beings with very similar wants and needs. When it comes down to it, we want a warm bed to sleep in at night. We want a place that's secure to raise our family. We want to be safe so we don't get eaten by tigers or robbed by vandals in the overnight, right? Things like that. We
It's
we
true.
we all start with that same pro humanity footing. So if we can at least start there, you know, people say, "Well, I've got nothing in common with this person." What do you mean you've got nothing in common with this person? If you don't drink water today and I don't drink water today, we're both going to die. If that's the only thing we have in common, we've got something in common, right? So that pro humanity footing, if we at least start there and then realize that, and to go to, I'm going to quote a very good friend of mine, Monica Guzman. She's incredible. And one of the things that she says is those who are underrepresented in our life will be overrepresented in our minds and our imaginations. Now, the key to that phrase, and I'll say it again, those who are underrepresented in our life will be overrepresented in our minds and our imaginations. What happens is, with them being overrepresented in our minds and our imaginations, it's quite often not in a good way. You know, we don't say, I'm going to stay away from this person or this group of people, and I'm going to figure out all the reasons that they are the greatest people in the world. It just doesn't work that way, right? So if we stay stuck in our own silos and don't have conversations with people we disagree with, or people, that if conservatives don't ever talk to liberals and liberals don't ever talk to conservatives, the only thing that really happens then is their effective polarization the way that they believe about those people, the things that they believe about those people, get more and more negative, and they are less and less likely to interact with them in a civil way. You know, so
Yeah.
anything that we do in life that keeps us polarized, like watch the news, um, will
Depends on where you watch it.
well, some are worse than others, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But the reality is if you, if all you're doing is interacting with outrage entrepreneurs online and in social media and people that are trying to keep us divided, chances are you are going to stay pretty divided. Your effective polarization bias is going to just going to become more enhanced all the time, and effectively you don't know anything about those people, but you've made up in your mind what those people are, and it's quite often a mischaracterization of who they actually are. So the reality is this, Rob, going back to your original question, what can we do to tame the toxicity and enhance the civility? Have conversations, get out there and be kind to your neighbor, no matter what they, maybe they're a different religion than you, different color than you, they come from a different part of the planet than you do. But the reality is if our default position is kind, and our default setting is to listen to them with the intent to understand, you know, then the world's going to be a much better place.
Look, man, I agree. You have the mentality now, especially with social media, that it's like um, the whatever the popular majority thinks is what you should think, and when you don't, you're I don't want to say you're ostracized, right? And I think that's I grew up at a time where, and you, I'm sure, same thing, where we could have healthy debates with each other and walk away friends, right? You could have a disagreement with somebody and not hate them. And especially if you yourself have good points and you're able to bestow those points in a meaningful manner, not like going, my point's the right point, you suck. That's not going to win over anybody.
No.
If it does, I'm shocked, right? But if I can come out and say, hey, look, this is what I think, these are my thoughts, and here's why. I don't see why you can't have a healthy debate. And I look, you have a lot of keyboard warriors. I think the internet has hurt a lot of that. But I do see us healing a bit there. I am starting to see, and maybe you can agree or disagree, but I am starting to see more back and forth where you're not criticized for not having that popular thought, right? Which we're human, man. I think that it should be 50-50, unless it's something like crazy, right? Obviously, there's probably going to be, like we're all going to say, okay, World War II, the execution of Jews with World War II and Hitler, that was wrong. We could all agree on that, right? But if it's like, I like, vanilla and you like chocolate, we should be able to debate that a little bit. Like, chocolate also has this, right? Like, there's certain things you should be able to debate and walk away still not like hating each other. We got away from that, but I don't know. Do you agree? I've seen it better now than I have maybe 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, well, I think the tide is turning, right, a bit, Rob, because people are starting to realize that we are not nearly as different as many people would have you believe. We are not nearly as polarized as people would have you believe. We are still in very polarized times. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think we are as divided on certain things as we have probably been uh, since the Civil War. I mean, in the United States. Um, the thing about that is our perception of things, and just for your listeners, I want to kind of play things out a little bit. We've mentioned a number of times, how technology has changed, over the generations, and how much of a role the internet has played in our time. And I can remember a time, and I'm sure you can to a certain extent, where we didn't have 24-hour news cycles and the internet to bombard us with things every minute of every day. And we didn't have a time, there was a time when not every single thing that we discussed had to do with politics. And
Yep.
and the reality is this: one of the other big downfalls and big drags on society that the internet has brought to us is the idea that we personalize all of these different things that aren't necessarily happening in our neighborhoods, in our communities, right? In our town. And so when we think about things like, violent crime, right? Violent crime is still very, very small in this country relative to other big, you know, countries. But when all you see on the news every single day, or coming across your feed on social media, is, these people were shot and those people were shot and everything else, we start to personalize gang violence that's happening in Chicago or Minneapolis in outstate Minnesota, or I failed to ask where you're at, but the reality,
Philly.
you're
Philly.
I'm going to be in Philly here in a couple months, but um, we fail to realize that what's happening in downtown Philly is not happening out in rural Pennsylvania, right? It's just not. But since it's what we see all the time and it's the most prominent thing coming across our feed, we begin to personalize that. The same thing with polarization and the ugliness that we see online, right? We are meant to believe, if we're listening to our politicians, we are meant to believe that this world is coming to an end and every single thing we think about is an existential threat. But it's not. It's not. It's really not. And so the reality is, convincing, or not even convincing, just waking people up to the idea that everything isn't an existential threat. Everything isn't black and white, and our certainty on certain things based on listening to your favorite news organization or your favorite online personality, or grievance grifters and outrage entrepreneurs that are capitalizing upon people's fears, outrage, and grievance. If
Hmm.
we don't open people's mind to the idea that certainty is the fastest way to lose sight of all the other beautiful things that are happening in this world, we're in trouble. So I lost track. I got on a roll there. I'm not what your freaking question was, man. But I tell you what, it's this. It really comes down to this: civility, toxic polarization. My friend John Wood Jr. always says toxic polarization, the one problem that ensures all other problems won't get solved. It's an absolute truth. You know, we have to realize that we must not fall victim to the idea that everything is a black and white issue, and if I believe this way and you don't, then you're wrong, and I'm not going to talk to you anymore because you're wrong. you know that's going to put us in a very, very bad place, and that's not where we want to be.
Yeah. Look, man, and I gotta tell you this: I'm not necessarily a conspiracy theorist, although I do love conspiracy theories. I will tell you this: I've read a lot of books. Well, I do a lot of audiobooks because I drive a lot. But I'll tell you this: you know, for those of you that put your faith in, say, the government. The government doesn't always have your best interest at hand. Like, I read a couple books recently about, it's called Tripped. It was about a LSD and after World War II, and kind of its invention and things like that, and how the government was playing with it and things like that. But they talk a lot about divisive things where the government was trying to, they were doing it very subvertly, right? But they were trying to get divisive things to happen. Like they were cracking down a lot on drugs like cocaine and things like that when they knew that a lot of, younger black kids, that's what they were doing and that's what they were selling, and they were putting them away for 30 years. Or if they were selling pot, they were putting them away for 40 years, right? Which is insane to think about now because like it's legal in 30 something states. So I do think it's also an education thing too for me. Whereas I've been reading a lot more books, not just like I like nonfiction, right? But I also do a lot of fiction too because I feel like you need to massage the imagination a bit to a certain degree.
I like it. Yeah.
But the nonfiction stuff too is really important because you start to see other points of view. You start to learn about things like I had no idea. Like I knew what was that's gonna drive me nuts now. What was the thing that they called the LSD trials that the government was secretly doing?
MK Ultra? No.
MK Ultra.
Was
MK
it?
Ultra.
Yeah,
It was MK. So MK Ultra, I mean, they hired a guy that was not even part of the government, and he ran fucking everything, and he was testing he was testing people in the fucking FBI. Like he would just spike LSD in their coffee. I mean, they were doing crazy, and which is really illegal.
Oh
like
my
there's
God.
rules and regulations with drugs and how you're supposed to, like, people, like if you're doing a test for drugs, someone has to give you consent. Like that is part of a law
You
that
would
was
hope.
brought about after World War II when they found all the crazy shit Hitler was doing, right? And they're like, you can't do this. You can't just test to see if people can live for 24 days without sleep, or like crazy shit, right? So I'm not saying don't distrust the government, but sometimes you also have to look inward and say, all right, who has my best interest at heart? At the end of the day, it's probably yourself, right? You want to, and you care about your family, and those things are important. Don't always put your trust outside your basket thinking like, oh yeah, the government, oh yeah, like if that's a law, they're protecting me. Nah, it's not always true. So I feel like you do also have to be a healthy skeptic. Does that make sense?
A healthy skeptic is great, man, because quite honestly, if you think about this, Rob, who is our best advocate? It's always going to be us, right? Who, I mean, now, there have been many times in my life where I was definitely not my best advocate, and I was definitely not doing the best thing for me. I fully acknowledge that. But you talk about the government, and this is actually something that I picked up. It was, and this is it's certainly, I think it's a paraphrase and definitely a little bit different than he says it. But in J.D. Vance's book Hillbilly Elegy, he talks about the government being neither the answer to or the cause of all of your problems. Ultimately, coming down to this, right, is the government is important. It's a necessary, what I would call, as a as a very conservative, almost libertarian guy in some respects, I would say the government is in many ways a necessary evil. But I don't want to
I
believe
would
that
agree.
they're evil. The reality is this, though. You know, it's not the cause of all your problems, and it's not the answer to all of your problems. Ultimately, the best thing that you can do for yourself is become an engaged and educated citizen, right? And the reality is also this. I mean, there's a part two to that, because being an engaged and an educated citizen also comes with the idea that not everything that you're thinking about and dealing with on any given day has to be political, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that we can deal with in life that are not, they're not a political issue. There is not a right way to look at it and a left way to look at it. There's sometimes it's just a human way to look at it, right? There is not a governmental answer. Now, I know there's a lot of people in the government that will tell you different, but there is not a governmental answer to every single problem that we have. In fact, I would contend, and I've said this before, but I think a lot of politicians spend a lot of their time pretending to fix issues that they themselves created, just to keep the cycle going, right?
They
So
need their job.
right? So the thing about that is the government's important. It's needed. You know, having experts is important. They are needed. I don't like the idea of people telling us that, well, don't believe the experts because the experts cause all the problems. That's not true either. But we have to find a balance in our lives as to what things do we want the government to deal with? What things can we deal with on our own? What do we want to do within our communities to, live civilly and safely? We're a tribal people. Humans are tribal. We tend to work in groups. You talked about the government performing experiments that were pretty whacked out, right? Yeah, I mean there have been experiments all throughout human history, to see, how the idea of teams and people become tribal, and then they become angry towards people outside their tribe. It's human nature. Those things happen. And then, I mean, you think about the books, you think about like Lord of the Flies, and how things just go completely chaotic, and if there's no rules at all, people just start killing and it just gets out of control. So we have to make a choice as individuals. Do we want to live in complete chaos all the time? Because if we want to live in complete chaos all the time, there's no safety, there's no security. We don't get the things that we have. I think that, America is the greatest country in the world. The vast majority of us could, could go to bed at night, not lock our doors, and we're going to wake up the next day with no issues. It's just, a
Yeah.
good thing. A lot of places in this planet or on this planet, the people can't say the same thing. You know, they're trying to find a hole to sleep in and hope that they don't get eaten by a tiger. The reality is we have to decide as a people, as a human race. Do we want to work together or do we want to keep fighting with each other? And we don't have to fight because we disagree. We just need to listen. Things can work even if we aren't on the same page on all things. It's it's I don't know.
Slippery slope is,
There you
is
go.
is what I'd like to say. Let's end on this. I didn't get to like 90% of the shit I was going to talk to you about because that's what anytime someone's an engaging person, that's what always happens, and that's good. If I get to all my questions, I'm always skeptical about how the interview is going to turn out. This is something I don't tend to bring up, but I know you're a conservative Christian.
Yeah.
Okay, and I've talked about this on my podcast many times, right? I was baptized Catholic, so I'm a Christian. But I will tell you this: I've always been more of a scientific person. I believe it when I see it. I've always been like that. Things have changed a little bit as I've gotten older because there's things you can't explain that you don't fucking know. But I will say this, and I want to talk to you because I feel like we've had a great conversation tonight.
Yeah.
Talk to me about like someone who's discovering their faith, right? Although I am baptized as a Catholic and I'm a Christian, I don't know if I believe, right? I'm in this discovery phase of what do I actually believe happens when I die? Like what happens to my soul? Where do I go? Can you talk to me a little bit about like, have you had this discussion with other people and, what do you say to those people who are still kind of discovering their faith, so to say?
So that's an incredible question, right? And it's something that many of us in our lives will struggle with, right? When do we, say yes to as okay? I'm just going to say, as a Christian, at what point would I or did I say? Yes, I'm going to be a follower of Jesus Christ. I believe that He died for my sins. I believe that had He not died for our sins on the cross, that we wouldn't have the salvation and the everlasting life that we get to have as Christians, right? A lot of those things can be debated, and a lot of those things come on faith. Um, it's
Yeah.
one of the hardest and yet most important decisions I think any human being can make in this world, right? And and there's a lot of things. You talked about science, right, and how science uh, relates to God and Christianity, and I'll go to a book that you may want to read, and I don't know if it's on Audible, but I know it was written by a person that I respect a lot, a good friend of mine named Dr. Francis Collins. He wrote the book The Language of God. He was also the head of the NIH. He headed up the Human Genome Project. Has worked for several presidents. Him and I are have developed a very close friendship. He talks about, how Christianity and science are compatible, and how those things work together. I will also say that for me, it was never a thing where I did not or I was not able to um, to comport the whole science and Christianity thing together. Uh, I
And real quick, I don't think you can.
yeah,
I think there's a correlation, but I do think that faith at its core is something you can't explain, and I think science is something you have to be able to explain with evidence. So I do think maybe there is a point where they interject, but I do think that at some point you have to say, oh well, I believe, and that doesn't always correlate with science. And that's, I think for me, that's been a little bit of my issue. But as I've gotten older, I have you think about death a lot more when you're not 20. When you're getting older and things start to happen, like, oh, my back hurts, like, am I dying? You start to think a little bit more about, well, what happens after I die? And that's kind of where I am.
yeah,
And my mom and my dad both very much believe Jesus died for our sins. They're very much Christian. They believe in that. And I'm not saying I don't believe. I do think there's an afterlife. I don't know. And I think for me as a human, for a while I'm like, yeah, I believe. But as an adult, I like to be true to myself. And, I try to put
yeah,
I'm one of those people, I wear my heart on my sleeve. So I always tell people, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I believe. I was baptized as a Catholic. Which is, obviously as a Catholic, Catholicism is very devout, right? There's a lot of rules. I
right,
don't know, and
yeah,
I always like to ask people who know, like, is there advice you can give to somebody like me who maybe doesn't
yeah,
know?
yeah, and I could
I bought that book, by the way. It
you
is
did.
on Audible. I bought
Oh,
it. So I'll
wonderful.
listen
Yeah,
to it and I'll let you know what I think.
very nice. Please do. Yeah, like I said, if anybody, if any of your listeners want to, uh, look up things about me, I've had several hours worth of conversations with Dr. Francis Collins, the author of that book, and him and I have appeared, and we continue to work together today on some bigger projects that are really pretty quite remarkable for a guy like me to end up having conversations like that with him. But I'll give you a couple stories real quick, Rob, because I know we're getting close to the end of our time. But you mentioned the word faith, right? And yes, proving Christianity or proving the existence of God using science, I don't, I think is probably a bridge too far for far too many people. I don't know enough about it, and I'm not going to pretend to do it. I think it takes a lot more faith to say that there is no God than to say that there is. And I'll tell you, uh, I can only say that by saying this. I've been in far too many situations over the course of my life where things were just too unreal to believe that some higher power was not or did not have a hand in what happened in my particular situation. I'll tell you a couple very quick stories. Once I was in my late teens, early 20s. I can't remember the year at this point, but it was in the early 90s, and I was I was in a trailer park at a particular person's house. I'm sitting there in the trailer park in the summer. sitting there, air conditioners going in the trailer, and I heard something. I heard something, and I did not know what I heard. And I could not pinpoint what I heard. I could only follow what I thought I was hearing. And I walked outside, and whatever it was got louder. And I started following this noise that I thought I heard. Several trailers down in this trailer park, I found a man laying across the steps of his trailer, an elderly man who was dying of a massive heart attack. And I ran into his house, grabbed his phone. I didn't have a cell phone at the time. I ran into his trailer, grabbed his home phone, called 911, said, "Hey, get here quick. This guy is whatever." He died, but he didn't die alone because I was there with him. And when the paramedics asked me, how did you know that he was here? How did you know? I said, I don't know. I don't know. I've got no idea. It would have, I said I was in the trailer, 6 trailers down, whatever it was, and I was inside, and they're like, there's zero. I mean, this guy had a massive heart attack. There's no way he could have made a noise loud enough for you to hear him from where you were. It's just not. It's not humanly possible. But the man didn't die alone that day. He died with me. Okay, that's one story. The next story was I was remodeling years later. I was in an apartment down in Mount Dora, Florida. I was helping buddies of mine remodel this apartment. That was just it was a crazy old house, and they bought this thing and we're turning it into like 3 apartments. And I'm trying to do some wiring in what was going to be the kitchen. And I had fed a wire up through the wall, and I'm trying to reach in the ceiling to find this wire. And I'm reaching around, and I can't get a hold of this wire, and it's driving me crazy. And I'm getting mad, and they're getting mad. We're all hot, we're all sweaty, we're dirty, we're hungry. And I said, Jesus Christ, would you throw me a bone? Just that phrase, right? Jesus Christ, would you throw me a bone? And I'm like, oh, I got it. I grabbed what I thought was the wire. I pulled it out. I had a chicken bone in my hand, or some kind of bird bone in my hand. Literally, I mean, this honest to God truth, weirdest thing. And the guys that were on, I was on a ladder. They were on the ground. They're like, it freaked us all out, right? And then I reached back in, grabbed the wire, pulled it out, and we were done. So that's just 2 stories. I mean, I will tell you that it's just, there have been way too many things in my life. And there was a very long period of my life where I was so miserable that I would just lay down and pray at night. Hey, if you hate me this much, God, just take me out of this world. And he never did it. But it's there. You talk about the word faith. And what faith is and how we develop the faith that Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior and did what they say he did, and we don't all get there at the same time, but if we say yes, we get to the same place. So I guess we can call that what it is.
Hey, look, I like it, man. And I'll let you know when I get there. I have my thoughts, but and I've had some interesting things happen in my life too. So we'll see how long it takes me to get there. But look, I appreciate being able to have that conversation, right? And we can recognize that you are embracing your faith, and I'm still in the infancy stage. And I think, to end the podcast, that's a great way, right? That we had a conversation where you follow what you follow, and I'm still getting there. And I think at the end of the day, if we had more conversations like this, it would help people.
That's right.
Tell me where can we find all of your content, your podcast? We didn't even get to that, right? Derate the Hate. Tell me where they can find your podcast and everything you're doing, and if there's anything coming up you want people to know, my followers.
Yeah, so the Derate the Hate podcast is where you're going to find most of my content, and you can find links to like my YouTube and other things there. So deratethehate.com, very easy to find. The word derate is like debate, but it's derate. So with an R, it means to turn something down. So deratetehate.com, or just Google Wilk Wilkinson. If you Google Wilk Wilkinson, there's all kinds of information out there. And then braverangels.org. That's the big thing. I mean, ultimately, if you're going to deratethehate.com, I want you to get to braverangels.org. It's America's largest grassroots cross-partisan organization working towards bridging divides, but working to build back that civic engagement, build back the civic renewal that made this country what it, the best place on the planet. So deratethehate.com, braverangels.org, and join the movement, man. Come aboard and be part of the solution, because there's no reason that we all got to hate each other. So let's make it happen.
Couldn't agree more, man. Couldn't agree more. My podcast is Drink Clock Pod on all socials. Drink Clock Podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. You name it, it's there. I promise you. You can look it. It's there. And look, man, it was a absolute pleasure having you on, dude. And I feel like I could talk to you for 3 hours. So thanks for hanging out. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Rob. Take care of yourself. I appreciate you, man. Take care.
You too, man.
On a stormy night where legends unfold, there's a podcast that's breaking the mold. Raise your voices, raise your glass high. Welcome to the Drink O'Clock Podcast. Let's dive. Oh, grab an old fashioned and join the fray. Raise your spirits, let the music play. From the corner park to the dance hall floor. Drink O'Clock Podcast, we're ready for more. We're ready for more. With a mix of folklore and rebel cheer, we'll guide you through tales of whiskey and beer. From Irish shores to lands afar, grab your friends, it's time to raise the